Hello, this is Mark Ryman, Learning Center Agronomist from the Bayer Learning Center at Gothenburg, Nebraska. And today I wanted to visit with you about one of the projects we've been working on for about 3 or 4 years, and that's really white corn product development and researching new white corn products. White corn is a little bit of a specialty thing. It's only grown on about 1% of acres in the United States, but it is important locally, and Nebraska is the #1 producer of white corn in the U.S. When we look at white corn product development, it's pretty similar to yellow corn, except sometimes you're looking for more specific things around the kernel because typically the end user of white corn is a food processor. When we look at the research that determines the viability of it, it really starts with yield. It's one of those factors that if you put it out in the field and it doesn't perform, it's really not going to have a place on that acre again. When we look at agronomics, we want to make sure that it's a stable product and it meets the needs of the producer out there in the field. And then kind of that specialty piece that we really look at detailed wise when it comes to something that's going to a food grade processor is those kernel attributes, making sure that they meet the end goal of the processor. We'll come back to yield in a little bit, but when we look at the desired agronomics for white corn, they're pretty similar to yellow corn. We're really looking at the standability of that product, how it handles standing out there until harvest. We're looking at the disease tolerance of it. How well does it resist things like gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight, and in particular for us in Nebraska, Goss's wilt. Green snap resistance is another one of those important factors, especially for us here in this part of the state. It really is something that the wind always seems to come along at the wrong time, so we want to make sure the product doesn't have any issues when it comes to snapping in high winds. Harvestability is an important factor. We want to make sure it runs through the combine easy. And then good husk coverage. This is something that we're always looking for, but it is a little more important with white corn because if you have a poor husk coverage, the sunlight can actually discolor some of those tip kernels and lead to some of that damage in the white corn. The other thing you want to prevent with a good husk cover is insect damage that can lead to those damaged kernels that let molds in that's not desirable in something that's going to a food grade end use either. The other, food grade attributes that we want to look at in detail really are with the kernel. And typically, each processor has a little bit different specifications they're looking for. Usually, though, we are looking for high grain test weight, so a very dense kernel. Usually, we want to see something above 60 pounds per bushel. The kernels normally have large amounts of horneous endosperm. That works better for the processors when they use it to cook and make snack foods. We typically want a rounded kernel because there is a lot of handling associated with the processing. We want to make sure those kernels don't chip and crack at their corners, which can cause problems. And then you want a nice white kernel color. What I mean by that in a little bit more detail is if you look at the corn kernel at the end of the yellow arrow, you see that really kind of glassy type, what we call horneous endosperm. That's very dense and very hard. That's desirable to a food grade processor. The white starch in the middle, it's kind of floury and it's just not very good for that end use. And that's a really hard kernel on the left. On the right, you've got one where you've got a lot more of that floury endosperm present. Typically, that'll indicate a lower test weight, and it's not as desirable for that end processor. The kernel shape piece, that's a little bit, maybe something really detailed to think about, but a nice round shape is actually pretty desirable just because it flows better. You don't get as much corner chipping as you do maybe with the kernel on the right that actually shows, kind of that square shape. Those corners are more likely to get chipped in processing. That can lead to damage that makes it not cook as well or work as well for that end-use processor. So a rounded kernel is nice. The color is also important. You really want to have white kernels. So the kernel on the left has a nice white color. The kernels in the center are kind of a lemony or off-white. They've got a little bit of the yellow mixed in with the white. and then the right-hand kernel has a bronze color to it. And you really want to make sure that you've got nice white kernels. This just shows the kernels on the ear. On the left-hand side at the tip of the arrow, you've got some kernels that have a little bit of a lemony off color rather than being white. And on the ear on the right side of the screen, you actually have a few kernels that are yellow, but it's not really a factor of it being something in the genetics of the corn product. It's just that you had some cross-pollination from yellow corn in your field. That's something you want to prevent as a white corn producer, but it's not really impacted by the genetics or the product that you choose to put there. It's more around how you manage that isolation. So those are some things we see out in the field. If it's cross-pollination, you really want to find a way to manage that, because processors will only accept a certain number of yellow kernels in their grain. And then finally, once you have those kernels looked at and they meet a lot of those specifications, you can actually submit them for processor approval. So what the process is really managed by the end user. Each end user might have different requirements, and we want to collect the samples for the processor. They can be very large ones actually out in the field, or they can be very small, just looking at the kernel properties. And then the processors test the products to see if they meet their specifications. If they meet their specifications, they'll end up on the approved list, and then as a grower, you can grow that product and sell it to that processor, typically at a premium. That's why we grow white corn rather than yellow corn. There typically is more of a premium in it. As I said, we'd come back to yield and agronomics. We didn't talk about yield to start with, but we have done some research here at the Learning Center. So for the past few years, we've been doing white corn evaluations. In 2019, we had 6 white corn products, and 4 of them were carried over from 2018, so we have 2 years of data on yield. We set up the studies as a randomized complete block with 3 replications. We controlled the weeds uniformly and didn't use any insecticides in the study other than what was on the seed. And the corn was fully irrigated to meet the water needs of the crop, which over the past 2 years here at Gothenburg hasn't been a whole lot. We have a silt loam soil, and our previous crop was soybean in both cases, and we use strip tillage typically here at the Learning Center. When we look at the yield results we got, this is that table that looks at what happened in both 2018 and 2019 for the products that carried over. We had an average yield of the 112 RM commercial product at 272 bushels per acre, the 113 RM commercial product at 257, the 116 RM commercial product at 264, and then the experimental product that went across both years at 111 RM at 259 bushels per acre. And overall, we averaged 263 bushels. So good yields, what we're looking for in terms of a new white corn product to put in the marketplace. We look at what happened just in 2019. 2019 was a little bit more variable than it was in 2018. Our top yielding corn product was 270 bushels per acre, and our overall average was about 251 bushels per acre. On the agronomic side of it, they did a pretty good job of standing up out there in the field. We didn't have issues with Goss's wilt, and we didn't have issues with green snap. And the other positive thing we saw in terms of kernels was, if you look at the test weight on the right-hand side, we ran pretty high test weights, indicating that they had, good, at least test weight characteristics that a food processor would be looking for. So overall, in the test, these white corn products are fairly far along in the selection process. They did very well for us. So really what we learned, kind of over the past few years of looking at products and doing research is that, almost all the products that we've looked at have very good yield potential. And overall, we had very solid agronomics. On the kernel side of it, we've seen good kernel properties for food grade end use, and we'll continue to look at those and have them evaluated for processor approval. Kind of on a last note, if you're looking for a white corn product for your farm, check with your local sales team member and determine which one's going to work best for you. They can provide a lot of guidance there. At the end here, I do want to remind you that, this is information from the Gothenburg Learning Center. We do have more information on this study available, some more detail written up about it in our research results that are available online. And remember that performance may vary from location to location. So, year to year, we know every year is different. So, please pay attention to that when you're making your product decisions. With that, I thank you for taking the time to listen to me today, and I look forward in the future to sharing more of our agronomic research with you that we get to do every year here at the Learning Center. Thank you and have a good one.